Chapter 310. My apologies. You were cursed by the old hag personally, so the curse has not been lifted yet, Wilbur said. Sammy's expression shifted into one of terror. What am I going to do then? Don't be scared. I've got an idea. It's just going to be a little more troublesome, Wilbur said. Sammy calmed down upon hearing there was a way out. After all, Wilbur had been powerful enough for her to be able to trust his words. Dom frowned slightly. He had heard Wilbur say before that the curse could be broken by force. But entering Sammy's spirit might come with the risk of hurting her and would be dangerous to some extent. But Darlene was dead, and there was no other way out. Sammy, Dom, and Moose looked at the ground littered with bodies. A shiver ran down their spines. Wilbur had killed 400 to 500 zombies, as well as the zombie giant formed after. He had even been able to deflect Darlene's fatal spell at the very end, one that she had sacrificed her life to cast. It could only be said that Wilbur was just far too powerful. Wilbur looked around him before picking up the cane Darlene had left behind. It seemed like a pretty decent contribution to the dragon's altar. He smiled, tossing it into his demiplane. He considered this a success, as contributions were truly hard to find. Set the place on fire, and we'll go home. I'll think of a way to break your curse, Wilbur said to Sammy. She nodded in response. Moose walked up and was about to say something when a series of hurried footsteps could be heard. A tall man in a uniform led a group of people, walking up to Wilbur and the rest with an ashen expression. Gibby Landis, chief of the Sandinville Special Forces, you're all under arrest for public assault. Wilbur chuckled. Dude, seriously? All this over a fight? I think you didn't realize who you were beating up. Lee Shorson emerged with 2 men from behind Gibby. Lee's face was still swollen then, making him look rather comical. The rage in his eyes, however, was evident. Wilbur hardly paid him any mind, merely turning to Gibby and saying, "Aren't you going to clean the place up first? A plague could break out if we leave the place like this." It was only then that Gibby, Lee and their men realized that the village was littered with chunks of unidentifiable objects. The chunks differed in size, and all of them were charred completely. It was hard to see what they were at first glance. Gibby picked up one of them, inspecting it in his hand. His expression shifted at once, and he drew his gun to point it at Wilbur. "This is a part of a dead body. Tell us what you did here. What happened to the villagers here?" Gibby looked around the village, but the barrel of his gun remained pointed at Wilbur. A massacre had happened here, and it looked like there had been a lot of casualties. It was a big case. Just then, Lee shouted, "Oh, they murdered people too. Take them all out, Gibby." "Mr. Shorson, this is a serious case that we can't take out on them privately. An investigation must be filed." Gibby frowned. Lee snorted. "You can just tell me if you don't need your job, and I'll get my dad to fire you this very second so you can go back to the mountains." Gibby was furious, but there was nothing he could say. Lee noticed that and grabbed the gun in Gibby's hand to point it at Wilbur. Chapter 311. Gibby flew into a panic at once. "You can't do this, Mr. Shorson. Cut the crap. I want these 3 dead at all costs by today. How dare you touch someone like me, you fucking piece of shit." Lee glowered at Wilbur, preparing to pull the trigger. Sammy and the rest turned pale. Unlike Darlene, Lee's father was a government official. Lee was crazy and more than capable of bringing them a great deal of trouble. Wilbur was not afraid of staring down the barrel of a gun, but Sammy and the rest were. Just then, Wilbur chuckled. He reached for his pocket, pulled out his license, and showed it to Lee. "Wilbur Penn, Department of Paranormal Research and Defense. I've got official orders from the most powerful people in the country. Don't even think about continuing what you're about to do." Lee stopped short, eyeing the license. A moment later, he shouted, "My ass, you're not fooling me with that fake license. Do you take me for an idiot?" Wilbur smiled. "You don't believe me? You can have Chief Landis here check it for you. He might have an idea of who I am." Lee struggled for a beat. Wilbur looked perfectly calm, and it did not look like he was lying. However, Lee had never heard of such a department before. Just then, Gibby said, "Can I take a look at your license?" "Sure." Wilbur tossed it over. Gibby inspected the license closely. It was indeed legitimately sealed and watermarked by all the relevant departments. The license did grant Wilbur a shocking amount of power. He frowned at Wilbur incredulously. I'm sorry, but why haven't I ever heard of a department like this one? I fucking knew it. You were trying to lie to me, pretending to be some official big shot. You piece of shit. Lee smirked. Sammy and the rest exchanged glances as well. Did Wilbur actually have such a position of power as well? Wilbur was calm himself. You haven't heard of my department because your rank's too low. Feel free to ask your superior about it, or even the most powerful person in the province. One moment. Let me make a call. Gibby was suspicious but still wanted to check for himself. Lee said, Chief Landis, do you seriously believe this scammer? It's only going to take a few minutes. Gibby glanced at Lee, taking out his satellite phone and dialing a number. Several verifications later, Gibby was connected to the person in charge at Gravonia province. It did not take long before his expression changed drastically. Upon ending the call, Gibby walked back up to Lee and grabbed his gun back from him. What the fuck are you doing? Have you lost your mind? Lee fumed. Gibby shot a glare at him before turning to bow at Wilbur. Gibby Landis, Chief of the Sandonville Special Forces, I've received orders to help you with your investigation. I'm ready to take orders, sir. Lee was at a loss for words, staring at Gibby blankly. Gibby hardly paid him any mind, not dropping the hand he was saluting Wilbur with by a single inch. Wilbur took his license back, casting a smile at Lee that sent shivers down his back. Wilbur's expression darkened after that as he turned back to Gibby. Lee Shorson has been found complicit in a paranormal investigation. Arrest him and hold him until I get back to interrogate him. Yes, sir. Gibby waved a hand, and his fellow officers surrounded Lee and his men at once. Lee was positively boiling then, shouting at Gibby, You're out of your fucking mind. Touch me and I'll have my dad fire you this very instant. Lee Shorson, you're a wanted suspect. I won't hesitate to shut you up if you continue insulting my team, and I like this. Chapter 312. Gibby had resented Lee for a long time now, but the power Lee's father held practically made Lee untouchable in Sandonville. Now that Gibby had received orders from the province officials, even someone like Lee could hardly protest. Lee and his father were just the top dogs of Sandonville, but they were hardly anything in Gravonia province, let alone in the face of a department like Wilbur's. Gibby reckoned that Lee and his family were done for after ruffling the feathers of someone like Wilbur, so he did not hesitate in the slightest to go all out against Lee. Gibby sneered coldly. Cuff him. One more word from you and I'll stuff your mouth shut. His officers got to work at once, and Lee was caught off guard by the sudden coldness. He was shocked into silence, not daring to say a word. Lee's men were also handcuffed and taken away, both of them pale as sheets as they trembled from head to toe. They had been used to having things going their way with Lee and had never experienced anything quite like this before. Just then, Gibby bowed to Wilbur once again. The suspects have been apprehended. Do you have any more orders for us, sir? Nope. Keep an eye on them when you're at the station until I get there. I have some matters to take care of here. Yes, sir. Gibby called out in response and left with Lee and his men in tow. Gibby had received his orders and was eager to follow them so that he would not get into any trouble. After Gibby and the others were gone, Wilbur opened his palm. There was a flame in the center of it. He shook his hand a little, and the flame multiplied by the hundreds before spreading around the village. Wilbur led Sammy and the others out of the village, looking at the flames soaring to the heavens. May you all rest in peace. The flames were a prayer that he had said for the souls of the people whose bodies had been turned into zombies by Darlene. Just then, Moose walked up to Wilbur. Sir, what should I do now? Well, you're free. You can do whatever you want, as long as you don't harm anyone, Wilbur replied. Moose sighed. My fellow cultivators and I were sent here to practice witchcraft at a young age and cursed upon our graduation to scour the grounds for riches and dead bodies. I really don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I'm sure my friends are the same. Wilbur frowned. Moose's situation was rather special. The witchcraft they practiced was not considered evil, as long as their powers were used for good. However, Moose and his friends would have no one to guide them from here, making them particularly vulnerable to going down the wrong path. Wilbur gave it some thought before saying, "How about this? Find your friends and have a talk with them first. If you really feel like you can't get used to this new life, come to Sea Lake Island in Town and look for me." "Thank you, sir," Moose said gratefully. Wilbur smiled, leaving with Sammy and Dom. The three of them reached Sandonville in the evening, pulling up in front of the Special Forces Department. Wilbur told Sammy and Dom to get some rest before having Jibby lead him to the detention cell. Lee was sitting at the table, his ankle cuffed to the interrogation bench. He saw Wilbur and Jibby walking in and began shouting at the top of his lungs at once. "Jibby Landis, how dare you do this to me? My father's the governor. I'm going to make sure you get it." Chapter 313. It seemed like Lee had still not grasped the situation entirely. He thrashed about wildly, shouting at the top of his lungs like a feral dog at Jibby and glowering murderously at Wilbur. Jibby scoffed, not paying him any mind. Wilbur chuckled, sitting down across from Lee at the table. Tiesk. I'd be thinking of ways to get out of this without a sentence instead of barking wildly like a mad dog," Wilbur teased. Lee gritted his teeth. "There's nothing you can do to me. My father's the state governor. You had better let me go or you won't even get out of this alive." "I guess you're not changing your mind," Wilbur glanced at Jibby. "Lee Shorson is complicit in causing damage to an investigation held by the Department of Paranormal Research and Defense. I suspect his father's part of this as well. Arrest him and get someone from the Municipal Commission for Discipline Inspection to run an inspection on both of them and see if anything's off." "Yes, sir. Right away." Jibby left the room, making a call to his superior in the province for safety measures. Upon receiving direct orders for an arrest, Jibby got to work at once. The Municipal Commission for Discipline Inspection said that they would be sending representatives over at once as well. Jibby let out a long breath and called for a team before setting out to arrest Lee's father, Archie Shorson, at once. They returned to the Special Forces Department not long after. Lee's expression finally turned to one of terror upon hearing that his father was getting arrested. He seemed to finally understand the severity of the situation and turned white as a sheet. Wilbur smirked at him coldly. "I won't even start on anything else. With that rotten personality of yours, there's no way there isn't anything wrong with your family. Let's see how cocky you can still be once your old man's been found out for something and sent straight to jail." "No way. There's no way this is happening. You don't have the power to do that," Lee shouted. Wilbur merely smiled, not wishing to waste his time. Not long after, Archie Shorson, governor of Sandonville, was arrested and sent to the same detention cell. Both father and son exchanged terrified glances with each other. Archie did not know why he had been arrested all of a sudden, and Lee did not know just what power Wilbur held to be able to arrest his father just like that. Just then, the people from the Municipal Commission for Discipline Inspection arrived at the detention room as well. Wilbur showed the people in charge his license. "These two have been arrested for disrupting an investigation held by the Department of Paranormal Research and Defense. Please run a disciplinary inspection on them and find out if there are any other problems." "Got it. We'll do our best." Wilbur shook the disciplinary inspector's hand, turning back to look at Archie and Lee. "I'd congratulate you if they don't find anything, but I doubt that it would be the case judging from the way you think you're the god of Sandonville." Lee finally panicked for good, bursting out into loud sobs at his father. Archie himself, however, was terrified beyond measure. He knew better than anyone else just what he had done and could not afford to be inspected this way. Wilbur chuckled at the sight of the both of them and got up to leave. Jibby walked Wilbur, Sammy, and the rest of them all the way to the main door of the department. "Thank you for getting rid of this hooligan for the people of Sandonville." Jibby bowed deeply. Wilbur smiled. "Do your job well and you won't have anything to fear." He then got in his car and drove away. Jibby stood where he was for a long time, thinking about Wilbur's words. He knew what Wilbur was implying with that. Jibby's gaze turned firm, and he turned to head back to the detention room. He knew that the Shorson father and son were doomed. Chapter 314. The province was going to bear down on both of them for disrupting a Department of Paranormal Research and Defense investigation on top of everything else. Besides, Jibby had a great deal of dirt on those two as well. Wilbur, Sammy, and Dom finally returned to Seachertown after a whole night of driving. It was past 10 in the morning when they arrived at Sea Lake Island, where Wilbur told Sammy and her brother to get some rest until Wilbur got to breaking Sammy's curse at night. However, Sammy could not wait any longer, and Wilbur had no choice but to relent under the siblings' begging. Wilbur brought both of them to his room. He sat down on the couch before saying, "Have you thought this through? I'm going to need to enter your consciousness and spirit with my spirit energy if I'm going to break your curse. All your secrets and memories will be exposed to me. Are you absolutely sure about this?" "I'm sure. I don't have anything to hide. I just hope you can break my curse, sir." Sammy had made up her mind that she was going to get her curse broken no matter what. She had suffered enough. Wilbur nodded, but Dom piped up worriedly. "Sir, are you saying that Sammy's spirit might be damaged? What are the consequences if that happens? She might lose her mind or worse." Wilbur's words scared the wits out of Dom and Sammy's initial determination was beginning to waver a little. However, Wilbur flashed a smile. "Don't be too worried. I'm just saying there's a risk. I'm pretty sure the curse isn't too powerful, so it should be fine." Both brother and sister heaved a sigh of relief, and Sammy nodded her head in agreement to proceed. Dom nodded as well. There was not much point in living a cursed life. Wilbur said, "Well, I'm going to get to it now. Dom, you can wait outside." Dom nodded. He did not understand much but knew that he would only be a bother if he stayed there. Wilbur called Sammy to his bedroom and pointed to his bed. "Lie down." Sammy blushed but did as she was told. "Relax. Just imagine you're going to sleep, and everything's going to be fine when you wake up." Before Sammy could respond, Wilbur tapped her on the forehead. A wave of spirit energy entered her body and Sammy fell unconscious at once. Just then, Wilbur muttered a few chants. A barrier formed around the room at once, blocking it completely from the outside world. Upon doing this, spirit energy surged forth from Wilbur's body as he entered Sammy's consciousness. The next second, Wilbur was enveloped in endless darkness. The only visible thing in this darkness was a faint red glow in the center, surrounded by some silvery wisps of light drifting around. This darkness was Sammy's consciousness, and the red glow was the flame of her spirit. The wisps of silvery light were her spirit energy. That was just the consciousness of a regular human being, and everyone looked slightly different according to their conditions. Just then, Wilbur's presence came up to Sammy's spirit flame. The flame was only the size of a palm, swaying slightly. Upon closer inspection, there was a thin gray fog swirling around the flame. That was the curse Sammy was under, and Wilbur's task was to take that gray fog out and destroy it. Standing still in front of the spirit flame, Wilbur reached out and began to touch Sammy's spirit. At the same time, all of Sammy's memories hidden in her spirit surged toward Wilbur. Wilbur smiled. Just then, the fog seemed to sense a threat as it detached itself from Sammy's spirit flame and lashed out at Wilbur. Chapter 315. Wilbur raised his eyebrows before barking out a loud laugh. He had just been wondering how he was going to separate this fog from Sammy's spirit flame when the problem had solved itself for him. He stared right at the incoming fog and two silver sparks shot out of his pupils. The sparks shot out, torching the gray fog into oblivion within seconds. There was hardly a trace left. The fog was gone, and so was the curse. Wilbur's work was all done now. The spirit was the most mysterious part of the human body, but also the most fragile and complicated. That was why Wilbur had taken so much care in doing this. Honestly, he had the curse itself to thank for being able to break it so quickly. The curse had an aggressive nature and was prone to attacking all sentient bodies that approached. However, the curse's attack was hardly anything against someone like Wilbur. Upon breaking Sammy's curse, Wilbur slowly exited Sammy's consciousness as he retracted his spirit presence back into his own body. Damn, even celebrities have a hell lot to be upset about. He chuckled, tapping Sammy lightly on the forehead. Sammy stirred slowly, looking at Wilbur in a daze. He smiled back at her. "Your curse has been broken, and your spirit's undamaged." "Really?" Sammy was overjoyed. Wilbur nodded. Sammy got to her feet to thank Wilbur but was overcome with a wave of dizziness. Wilbur said, "Your spirit's extremely weak right now, so you'll need to rest for a while." He retracted the barrier and led Dom in. Seeing his sister unharmed and the smile on Wilbur's face, Dom figured that his sister's curse had been broken. Both brother and sister thanked Wilbur profusely, but he merely said, "Don't mention it. You gave me your jade statue in exchange for this. It's a fair trade." The siblings did not really agree with this. It was true that the jade statue was their family heirloom and practically priceless. However, at the end of the day, it was just an item. Money was hardly a problem to the Chandon family, and they would even be willing to spend the rest of their days as regular folks in exchange for Sammy's curse being broken. The two of them thanked Wilbur profusely and even invited him to dinner. However, Wilbur turned them down. With no other choice, they could only invite Wilbur to visit Zealand whenever he had the time, with the promise of treating him like a king to show their sincerity. Wilbur nodded in agreement, and the siblings finally left. They got into their car, and Dom could not help but say, "This trip to Seachertown has really been eye-opening. I can't believe there's so much of the world I never knew about." "I know, right? Who could have thought that people like Mr. Penn existed?" Sammy was overwhelmed with emotion as well. Dom looked at his sister, narrowing his gaze. "Do you have a crush on him?" "That's ridiculous." Sammy flushed at once, glaring at her brother. Dom chuckled. "Go for it if you like him. You're a beautiful woman. You might just stand a chance." "Ha! Mr. Penn's like a god. I wouldn't even think about it." Sammy sighed. She did like Wilbur but did not have the courage to court him. Dom sighed to himself as well. The Chandon family was quite reputable, and Sammy had countless admirers back in Zealand. Those admirers only multiplied after she became a celebrity, but Sammy's standards had always been too high to pay them any mind. Both Sammy and Dom had finally realized just what it meant to be someone of power, and how small the both of them looked in comparison to these powerful elites. "Let's go home and take care of Rhea first," Dom said at last, his gaze burning with anger. How dare she do that to Sammy as her best friend? That was truly unforgivable. Chapter 316. Right after Sammy and Dom had left, Wilbur was about to rest when the phone rang. He saw that it was a call from Nancy and hurried to pick it up. "Hello, Nancy. How have you been?" "I'm all right, Wilbur. I know you're a busy man, but there's a gathering tomorrow night with all our classmates. Will you be coming?" "I'll pass this time." Wilbur had lost interest in these gatherings since what happened the last time. Nancy sighed. "I don't want to go either, if I'm being honest." "Well, don't go then." "I know, but everyone's been giving me hell for it. They're saying I'm all cocky now that I've gotten a promotion at work. I don't feel good turning them down." Wilbur let out a sigh. Sometimes these things could really be beyond one's control. "Well, I guess you'll just have to go then." I was wondering if you could go with me," Nancy asked in a feeble tone. Wilbur wanted to say no, but Nancy had been one of the first people to ever show genuine concern for him back in school. He could not find it in him to turn her down. "All right. I'm free tomorrow night anyway. It'll be fun," Wilbur said, doing his best to lighten his tone. Nancy replied at once, "Thank you, Wilbur. I'll see you tomorrow night then." "See you." The call ended, and Nancy fidgeted awkwardly in her office. She knew she should not do this but could not help herself from wanting to call Wilbur. She thought that she was going to give up on Wilbur for good this time if he turned her down. But he had said yes, and so happily too. Nancy fell into a dilemma. Ugh, what should I do? Nancy's expression turned into one of distress. Wilbur ended the call and returned to his room, collapsing onto his bed. He could really use some rest this time. Yet not long after that, the phone rang again. Wilbur held back his annoyance as he glanced at his phone. Seeing that it was a call from Matt Lilith, he answered it. "You're going to get it if this isn't a big deal." Wilbur was obviously a little miffed. Matt heaved for air on the other side of the call. "Sir, I'm so sorry if I got you at a bad time. We found the guy who stole the jade statue, but he's an expert. Gerard even got injured battling against him." "What?" Wilbur flared up in anger at once. How dare this thief steal in his territory and attack others when they were caught? On another note, however, Matt and Gerard were honestly an embarrassment too. They were both clan leaders and aura-level cultivators but had been beaten by a thief. Where are you? I'll be right there. Room 888 of Noir Nightclub. The guy even said he'd wait here for you to see just what Seachertown's got. Let him wait then. I'll make sure to let him know. Wilbur hung up the call, grumbling as he got out of bed and headed for Noir Nightclub. Over in the private club room, a handsome young man was sitting at a gambling table with a cigar in his mouth and a haughty expression. There were several other gamblers trembling in the corner of the room. Matt stood guard at the door, blood still leaking from his waist. Gerard was lying on the ground with a pool of blood around him. The guy sitting down took a long drag from his cigar and breathed out a ring of smoke before shaking his head. I can't believe you're calling yourselves the head of Seachertown's biggest clans when you're only at this level. What a joke. Don't get too cocky. You're going to get it once our master gets here. Matt snarled from the door. The man chuckled. Sure. I'll be waiting. I hope he doesn't disappoint me. Chapter 317. Wilbur sped all the way to Noir Nightclub, barging into room 888. Matt hurried to bow when he saw Wilbur. Sir, that's the guy. He pointed to a young man. Wilbur looked over and saw that the guy seemed to be in his 20s. He was a pretty handsome guy, with most of his hair covering half his face. Wilbur then spotted Gerard on the floor and hurried to help him up. He also channeled some spirit energy into Gerard to stabilize his condition. Gerard looked down indignantly. Sir, we've embarrassed your name. Wilbur said nothing. He glanced at the gamblers before his gaze finally landed back on the young man. What should I call you? Skylar White, King of Thieves, the young man said, taking a drag of his cigar. Wilbur replied coldly. King of Thieves, huh? That's some big name you got. Of course. Skylar did not seem humble in the slightest. Wilbur's expression darkened. You stole in my territory and even attacked others. How dare you still act so smugly? Skylar frowned. What's that? I was gambling here, and those two cheated. That's why I beat them up in the first place. Then these two other guys showed up claiming they were the leaders of the biggest clans in Seachertown and insisted on trying to take me away. That's why I attacked them. How is that my fault? Wilbur turned to look at Matt and Gerard. The two of them looked nothing but confused. It was clear they had no idea about the cheating. Just then, a middle-aged man ran over and bowed to Matt and Gerard. Gentlemen, I'm so sorry I was late. Let me handle this. Are you sure you can? Matt said coldly. The middle-aged man was Jerome Indigo, the owner of the nightclub. It was just a small casino in the day and a club at night. Jerome had been at home when he was informed about a fight breaking out because of a few rowdy gamblers. Apparently, even the leaders of the two big clans were there. Jerome was nothing compared to Matt and Gerard and had hurried over at once. He panicked at the coldness of Matt's words looking in the room. Two other gamblers were swollen in the face, but what was more shocking was that Matt and Gerard were both injured as well. Jerome's legs wobbled at the sight. There was honestly not much he could do right then. Wilbur frowned at the look of terror on Jerome's face. What about the cheating then? Jerome did not know who Wilbur was and was still frozen in silence. Matt shouted, "Answer my master." Jerome was shocked by those words. Why was Matt calling this guy his master? He hurried to say, "Sir, I was just going to investigate and settle it. Don't even bother. Let me tell you myself." Skylar piped up lazily. "I was just having some fun, but these two were trying to team up and cheat. I caught their bluff, but they refused to admit it. So I taught them a lesson." "Is that true?" Jerome looked at the two gamblers. They were regulars of the place, and Jerome knew who they were. These two were used to thinking they were highly skilled and could get away with anything and had probably gotten out of control. However, it was just their luck that they ran into Skylar. A fight had broken up, ending up in the two gamblers being beaten black and blue. Right after that, Gerard and Matt showed up demanding to take Skylar away. Just as the two gamblers were heaving sighs of relief, both Matt and Gerard had gotten injured themselves. A battle between cultivators was unlike any regular fight, and the two gamblers were scared out of their wits. They hurried to nod at Jerome's words at once. Yes, We cheated, we admit to it, and we'll pay up. This was a battle neither of the gamblers could afford to even take part in, and they wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Chapter 318. Jerome himself was rather fired up as well. How are you going to pay? Jerome had a bit of a name in the industry, and those two gamblers could hardly afford to mess with him. With the addition of Skylar, Matt, and the rest, the two gamblers said at once, "We'll follow the rules and pay up 3 times how much we won. Is that all right with you, sir?" Jerome looked at Skylar. Skylar replied nonchalantly, "Sure." The two gamblers made the transfer to Skylar at once, apologizing to him once again. Wilbur said, "So I take it the whole cheating debacle is done with." Skylar White. "It's done." Wilbur nodded. "Well, what about you stealing in my territory and attacking others when you get caught? It was the gamblers' fault for cheating, and they deserved to pay up for that. But after that was sorted, the stealing was to be dealt with." Skylar chuckled. "That's just what I do. Besides, I stole from rich people. It's like a Robin Hood situation." "And who were you feeding?" Wilbur asked coldly. Skylar shrugged. "Me. I'm the poor here." Wilbur burst out laughing. "What about you beating up my man?" "Well, I couldn't just let them get me. Could I? It's not my fault they're terrible fighters. Isn't that how the rules go anyway?" Skylar asked. Wilbur smirked coldly. "You're not wrong. Well, prepare to be taught a lesson then." Skylar got to his feet slowly, staring at Wilbur. "I know you're stronger than both of them, but I'd advise you against getting physical with me. You're going to get your body and your pride hurt. It won't look good for you." Skylar could tell that Wilbur was the real top dog in Town, but he was too arrogant to pay Wilbur any mind at all. Wilbur chuckled. "Don't worry about that. I'll make sure you have some fun, yeah?" Skylar's expression grew solemn. After all, the calm and collected look on Wilbur's face did seem rather powerful. Wilbur smiled at the look on Skylar's face, beckoning to him. Skylar flushed an ugly shade of purple, sensing Wilbur's teasing tone. Skylar exploded with his spirit energy, overwhelming everyone in the room. "Ambience level, huh? No wonder Matt and Gerard weren't a match for you," Wilbur mused. The other gamblers in the room could barely breathe due to the pressure of Skylar's spirit energy. They trembled all over and turned pale in the face. Wilbur merely crossed his hands behind his back, hardly paying him any mind. Skylar was furious at that. How dare Wilbur act so cocky in the presence of an ambience-level cultivator? "Take this," Skylar shouted. He ducked and vanished at once. Wilbur raised a brow in confusion. The next second, Skylar appeared behind Wilbur and aimed an attack infused with spirit energy toward Wilbur's waist. Wilbur deflected the blow with a wave of his arm, sending a punch to Skylar's face. The punch did not contain any spirit energy, but Wilbur was strong enough for the punch to do some damage to an ambience-level cultivator. Skylar reeled in shock. He disappeared once again, reappearing a few meters away from Wilbur. Wilbur stared at Skylar. "Wow. You know how to split move. I've underestimated you." "That's how we lost to him just now, sir. Be careful," Gerard shouted. Chapter 319. Split move was a technique that allowed the cultivator to travel within short distances in a split second. A very handy and useful technique. This was a type of technique that even sanctuary-level cultivators might not be able to master. However, Wilbur had looked up information on Skylar before this. He was just a beginner ambience-level cultivator. He must have some secrets of his own to be able to master the split move at that stage. Skylar himself was shocked as well. He was a master of split move and had never lost before. However, this man before him had just nullified his attack with just a wave of his arm, all while being able to attack Skylar as well. How had Wilbur been so sure where Skylar was going to travel to? Skylar could not understand the situation at all. Of course, Wilbur understood it fully. Whenever Wilbur got into a battle, he would extend his spirit energy to form an invisible sensor within a 1-meter radius around him. That allowed Wilbur to sense any being who got within this area without even needing him to see the target. The sensor would not only sense physical attacks, but spiritual ones as well. That was why Skylar's split move was rendered useless. Just then, Skylar finally began to take Wilbur seriously. The spirit energy around his body rippled before he disappeared altogether. Camouflaging, Wilbur balked, flashing a smile. You're quite a skillful one, aren't you? The camouflage and split move techniques were a deadly combination of techniques that could make one a stealthy killer who would leave no trace behind. Even someone with a higher level of cultivation than Skylar might not be a match for him. Unfortunately, he was going up against Wilbur. After Skylar disappeared, Wilbur slowly closed his eyes. His hands remained behind his back. Just then, the gamblers were already scared out of their wits. They were certain that Skylar was not human, disappearing into thin air just like that. The air on Wilbur's right side rippled slightly. A hand slowly got close to Wilbur's neck. The hand waited until it was a few centimeters away before surging with a powerful spirit energy, striking viciously. That was a skill Skylar had learned through being a thief and an assassin. Attacks like that were almost invisible to the naked eye. He would usually get close to the target before maximizing his strength and spirit energy to deliver the fatal blow. It was only then that Skylar would show himself. It would be too late for the target to react by then, leaving them with no option to resist. However, just as Skylar had begun camouflaging, Wilbur had spread out his spirit sensor around the entire room. He was able to sense where Skylar was at all times, as well as when Skylar was going to attack. Of course, Wilbur was already more than prepared to take Skylar's blow. Wilbur let out a low cry and his spirit energy surged forth from his body. Skylar's attack was unable to land on Wilbur in the face of his powerful spirit energy. Skylar was shocked. This man's spirit energy was at least at the level of an elite ambience level cultivator, much more powerful than Skylar himself. Just then, Wilbur reached out and grabbed Skylar by the neck to lift him off the ground, slamming him back down immediately. Chapter 320. A heavy thump echoed through the room as Skylar felt like his entire system was upended. The spirit energy in his body flowed out uncontrollably, unable to condense at all. It could be said that Wilbur had rendered Skylar unable to fight anymore. The other gamblers stared at them in shock. Skylar was already terrifyingly powerful, but this man was even more so. He had taken Skylar out with just one move, and none of them could understand just how this man had done it. Matt and Gerard were much more relieved upon seeing Skylar taken down, and they turned to the gamblers and owner of the club. "Tell anyone a word of what happened tonight, and we'll have your heads." The owner of the club barely dared to say a word, hurrying off with the other gamblers as they ran out of the club. Jerome drove right home. Whatever happened to the club was out of his control now. He was fine with anything as long as he did not get swept up into this terrifying battle. Just then, Wilbur turned to Skylar with a chuckle. "You're pretty strong, but just not strong enough." Skylar finally understood just how far away he was from Wilbur in terms of skill. Despite Wilbur not displaying skills that were extremely powerful, it was clear that he was at least at the sanctuary level. An ambience level cultivator like Skylar could hardly compare, even if he was powerful himself. Skylar gritted his teeth through the pain he was feeling and bowed to Wilbur. "I surrender. It's my fault for stealing. I'll buy what I stole for double the price, and even give the owners another double. Is that all right?" What Skylar was proposing was indeed quite fair and acceptable. This way, the owner of the stolen item would be able to profit completely. Skylar was the only one losing here, and that was just what he deserved for getting caught. Yet Wilbur looked coldly at Skylar. "That's it? What else do you want?" Skylar asked. Wilbur scoffed. "I make the rules here in Town. All right, fine. You can tell me what to do, and I'll just follow that." Skylar had somehow turned completely obedient within a few minutes. Wilbur said, "Leave one of your hands behind, on top of everything you just offered." "Dude, that's a little much. I was just stealing, not killing anyone or putting anyone's life in danger." Skylar was shocked. How was he going to survive after this with just one arm? Wilbur's tone was cold. "No cultivator in Town goes against the rules I set. You're no exception." "Dude, I really didn't know about these rules. I'll never do it again. You won't even see my face in Town ever again," Skylar said, close to tears. "It's too late," Wilbur replied, eerily calmly. Skylar gritted his teeth. "Dude, I've got $50 million in my account right now, and I'll give you all of it as repayment. Please just let me go." "I'm not really interested in money," Wilbur said, looking mockingly at Skylar. Wilbur was only scaring the guy. He was asking for it, being so cocky at the start. It was important to teach him a lesson that Town had no place for nuisances like him. Skylar was clearly terrified out of his wits, his mind racing as he shouted, "Dude, I'll give you anything but my hand. Please." "What do you have that could be as valuable as that hand of yours?" Wilbur continued teasingly. Amidst a fit of panic, Skylar said, "Fine. I know a spot that might contain lots and lots of ancient treasures. I'm sure you'll be able to get something good out of it considering how strong you are."